Here's the translated version of your text in American English. Betrayal. Right after the funeral, when family only cares about money. The scent of lies and old money filled the air in the funeral home. The room was packed with people wearing solemn expressions, yet their eyes were filled with calculations. Executives in tailored suits exchanged cold handshakes. Former colleagues whispered behind expensive handkerchiefs, and estranged family members suddenly pretended to be close, as if they had always been connected. I stood in the front row, next to my father's closed casket. Jonathan Whitmore, the man who built an $80 million empire from nothing. Jonathan Whitmore, beloved father, visionary leader, and self-made entrepreneur. The golden plaque on the casket read. But the whispers around me weren't about mourning his loss. They were about money. Who would inherit Whitmore Enterprises? Who would run the company? Who would control the empire my father worked so hard to build? I am Melissa Whitmore, his only daughter. I had spent 6 years working under my father, learning every move, understanding every corner of the company. I had the degrees, the experience, but most importantly, I had his trust. Deep down, I believed I was the most qualified person to carry on his legacy. But when my eyes locked onto my brother Daniel from across the room, a chill ran down my spine. His expression was too calm, too smug. Not the sorrow of a man who had just lost his father, nor the uncertainty of someone unsure of his future. Instead, it was certainty that he had already won. At that moment, I didn't fully understand, but I should have seen it coming. Grief can blind a person, but it doesn't hide betrayal. That afternoon, after the funeral ended, I went to Whitmore Enterprises headquarters, the place where I had spent my youth, working under my father's guidance. I walked in with the mindset of someone ready to bear the responsibility of continuing his legacy. I expected to find my father's office untouched, his worn leather chair empty, waiting for a worthy successor. But what I found was a nightmare. Daniel had taken over the office. He lounged in the chair, feet propped up on the desk, a glass of whiskey in hand, poured from the very crystal decanter my father used to drink from. The arrogance in his every move made it clear I already considered this company his. I froze at the doorway, rage bubbling inside me. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice icy. Daniel didn't even look up. He smirked, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Getting comfortable with my new office." I clenched my fists. "This isn't your office." He let out a chuckle, a real laugh, full of mockery and challenge. "Isn't it?" Then he pulled a stack of documents from the desk drawer, slid them toward me. I didn't need to look to know what it was. The will. I held on to a sliver of hope, that this was some cruel joke, that there was some mistake. But as my eyes scanned the bold letters at the top, the last will and testament of Jonathan Whitmore, my heart nearly stopped. Everything, the company, the assets, the real estate, the bank accounts, had all been left to Daniel. I gripped the document so tightly that my knuckles turned white. "This must be a mistake," I choked out. Daniel leaned back in the chair, the smirk of a wolf on his face. "No, Melissa, this is reality. I'm the rightful heir. And you have nothing." I should have cried. I should have been furious, screamed, demanded an explanation. But instead I laughed. My laughter made Daniel hesitate for a moment. He didn't understand. He expected me to beg, to break down in anger. But I didn't. Because a week ago I had already taken the first move. My smile widened, and as I pulled out a chair and sat across from him, I knew. This game had just begun. The shock of the will, when the incompetent takes power. I clenched the paper in my hands, my eyes scanning each line as if I could find an error. This couldn't be happening. My father wouldn't do this. But there it was, in bold letters at the top. The last will and testament of Jonathan Whitmore. Everything. The company, the assets, the bank accounts, the properties, all of it belonged to Daniel. For a moment the room seemed to spin, but I forced myself to breathe. I had worked for my father for 6 years, helped him build this company, proved my competence time and time again. And yet, now everything was being handed over to a man who knew nothing about business except how to spend money. Daniel leaned back in the chair, his feet still on the desk, twirling the whiskey glass with insufferable smugness. "This must be a mistake," I said, my voice cold. But Daniel just laughed. "No, Melissa, this is the truth." He emphasized every word, his eyes gleaming with absolute victory. "Dad chose me. Everything is mine. And you?" he shrugged. You have nothing. The arrogance in his tone made my blood boil. You don't deserve this company, I shot back, my eyes locked onto his. Daniel burst into laughter as if I had just told the funniest joke. Who cares? He raised an eyebrow. You see, Melissa, this isn't about who deserves it, it's about who was chosen. And Dad chose me. I gritted my teeth. But had Dad really chosen him? My father wasn't a fool. He always taught me that a business isn't a prize handed to the unworthy just because of blood ties. It belongs to the one who can run it best. If he truly believed that, then why would he leave everything to Daniel, a man who had never run anything except his credit card? But as I studied Daniel's smirk, I realized something. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't reacting like someone who had just received an unexpected gift. There was no shock, no emotion. He had known all along. He had orchestrated this. I tightened my grip on the will, carefully examining my father's signature at the bottom. It was real. No signs of forgery. A cold realization spread through me. My father had truly left everything to Daniel. But why? Daniel stood up, raising his glass as if in a toast. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to run. He winked, turning away as if the matter was settled. But he was wrong. I didn't break down. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. Instead, I smiled. A smile that made Daniel hesitate for a brief second. You think you've won, don't you? I said softly. Daniel turned back, frowning. What do you mean? I dropped the will on the desk, leaned back in my chair, and crossed my legs with deliberate ease. You think that just because of this piece of paper, you have control over the company? I asked, my tone calm. Daniel lifted his chin. I don't think. I know. I shrugged. Really? Then, have you gotten a call from the board yet? A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. The board? I smiled, casually pulling out my phone, scrolling for a moment, then placing the screen in front of him. An official email from Whitmore Enterprises' legal department. Daniel snatched the phone, his eyes scanning the content rapidly. I watched as the smugness in his face slowly twisted into horror. This translation maintains the intensity, tone, and structure of the original while adapting it naturally to an American audience. Let me know if you'd like any refinements. Here is the translated version of your text in American English. What the hell is this? He whispered. It's the truth, I said, my voice calm. You may have inherited the company, but you can't run it without the board's approval. And guess what? I leaned forward, my voice laced with amusement. They've already rejected you. Daniel's eyes widened, his voice trembling. No way. Dad left the company to me. I smirked. Yes, but Dad also knew you weren't capable. That's why, a week before he passed, he transferred the executive power to me. Daniel was stunned. I continued, my voice firm. You may own the company on paper, but I'm the one in control. I crossed my arms, meeting his gaze without hesitation. And now, you have two choices. 1, you walk away with whatever dignity you have left. 2, you fight this, and burn everything to the ground. Daniel clenched his fists, his face turning red with anger. You think you've won? I tilted my head slightly. No, I whispered. I know I've won. Melissa's counterattack. Turning the tables. Daniel thought he had won. The funeral hadn't even ended, yet he had already made himself comfortable in our father's office, feet propped up on the desk, pouring whiskey from Dad's favorite bottle as if it were his victory prize. And me? I stood there, looking at the will that left everything to him. And I laughed. My laughter made Daniel pause. He expected me to scream, to break down, to beg for mercy. But I didn't, because I had seen this coming. And I was ready. I sat in the chair across from him, arms crossed, eyes locked onto his. You think you've won, don't you? Daniel smirked. I don't think. I know. I shook my head, pulled out my phone, and scrolled to the email I had been waiting for. After a few taps, I placed the screen in front of Daniel. Then I guess you haven't seen this yet. Daniel stared at the screen. Displayed on it was an official email from Whitmore Enterprises' legal department, sent to the entire board of directors and major shareholders. I watched as his expression shifted, from arrogance to confusion, then to panic. What the hell is this? His voice dropped. I leaned back in my chair, speaking with deliberate ease. You are the legal heir, Daniel, but unfortunately for you, ownership and authority are two very different things. I pointed at the key section of the email. According to company bylaws, the board of directors must approve the successor CEO. And guess what? I tilted my head, smirking. They rejected you. Daniel read further, his hands trembling. The board had voted against his appointment as CEO. The reasons? Lack of experience, poor financial management, and an absence of leadership skills. His face turned red with fury. No way. I'm the heir. You can't do this. I shrugged. You may own the company, but you can't run it without the board's approval. Daniel clenched his fists. What the hell did you do? I pulled out another document from my bag and placed it on the table. A week before Dad passed, he granted me power of attorney over the company. Daniel's eyes widened. What? I continued, my tone steady. Dad knew you weren't capable. He knew that if you took control, you'd run this company into the ground in less than a year. So he gave me the authority. You might own it on paper, but I'm the one calling the shots. The anger in Daniel's eyes burned into outright rage. You think you can steal this from me? He shouted. I raised an eyebrow, completely unfazed. Steal? No, Daniel. You lost it all on your own. I flipped open the document, turned to a specific page and slid it toward him. This is your financial record for the past 4 years. It shows you've been misusing company funds for personal expenses, cars, mansions, luxury vacations you called business investments. Everything is documented. Daniel's face strained of color. You had no right to look at my finances. I scoffed. You're mistaken. Most of that money came from company accounts, and the board has seen everything. Daniel shot up from his chair, knocking papers onto the floor. This is my company. I remained seated, my gaze locked onto him. If that's true, then why is the board meeting with me and not you? He froze. The truth began to sink in. The board wasn't on his side. The company was no longer his. I stood up, gathering the documents from the table. Did you really think a piece of paper was enough to control an empire? I walked to the door, pausing before turning back to face him one last time. You were wrong. This company isn't a privilege. It's a legacy. And only the capable can protect it. Daniel said nothing. The silence between us was deafening. I smirked slightly. Welcome to reality, Daniel. You were never the boss here, and you never will be. I shut the door behind me, leaving him standing there, lost in the illusion of power he had once believed was his. The final showdown, Melissa's victory at the boardroom. The next morning, I walked into the Whitmore Enterprises boardroom with the confidence of someone prepared for battle. The atmosphere inside headquarters was tense. Who would lead the company after my father's passing? Daniel, the legal heir according to the will, or me, the one truly capable of leading? I scanned the room. The board members had worked with my father for decades. Some supported me, but others were still undecided. They didn't need a Whitmore as CEO, they needed a real leader. The door swung open. Daniel walked in, slow and self-assured. His eyes flickered toward me before he sat down, tilting his chin up arrogantly. Let's not waste any time, Daniel spoke first. My father made his decision. He left everything to me. That means I'll be taking over this company. I crossed my arms, staring him down. I think before making any decisions, the board should review some important evidence. I pulled a thick folder from my briefcase and set it on the table. These are Daniel's financial records for the past 4 years. They show a pattern of reckless spending and poor financial management. I flipped to the next page. This is an internal email from our finance department warning about his misuse of company funds. I glanced at the board members, watching the doubt spread across their faces. And finally, I slid another document across the table. This is proof that a week before my father passed, Daniel attempted to withdraw $10 million from company funds to cover his personal debts. Silence filled the room. One board member picked up the document, scanning the numbers. He took a deep breath. Has all of this been verified? I nodded. Every detail has been signed and confirmed by the accounting department. Daniel shot up from his seat. This is a setup, he shouted, his voice cracking with rage. She's framing me. I shrugged. I didn't do anything, Daniel. You did this to yourself. A board member leaned forward, tapping his fingers on the table. We need a trustworthy leader. We can't hand the company to someone with serious financial misconduct. I met their gazes, my voice steady but sharp. I'm not here to argue inheritance. I'm here to prove who is truly capable of leading this company. A long pause followed. Then the chairman of the board nodded. We'll take a vote. One by one, hands were raised. I didn't need to count. I already knew the outcome. I had just been officially named CEO of Whitmore Enterprises. This translation captures the intensity, strategy, and emotional weight of the original, while making it sound natural for an American audience. Let me know if you need any refinements. Here is the English translation of your text, adapted naturally for an American audience. The final blow: Daniel loses everything. I slid another document across the table toward him. Sign this. Transfer all your shares to me, walk away from the company, and I'll make sure the board doesn't pursue legal action against you. Silence filled the room. Daniel looked at me, his eyes a mix of anger, defeat, and desperation. What if I refuse? His voice was hoarse. I crossed my arms. Then you go to court, and I can assure you, the company's lawyers won't go easy on you. Daniel stared at me for a long moment. I could see the wheels turning in his head. A man like Daniel, someone who had always relied on the privileges handed to him, wouldn't survive if he lost everything. Finally, he let out a long breath, slowly picking up the pen, his hand trembling slightly. One by one, the letters of his name appeared on the transfer agreement, sealing the end of his dreams of power. When he finished signing, I took the document, reviewed it carefully, then folded it shut. I now officially owned the entire company. Daniel slumped back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. It's over. I stood up, adjusting my jacket. You'll have enough money to start over somewhere. But you'll never return to Whitmore Enterprises. He looked at me, his eyes empty. Is this what you wanted? To destroy me? I paused, meeting his gaze. No, Daniel. I just wanted to protect our father's legacy. You destroyed yourself. Then, I turned and walked out of the estate my father had built, leaving behind a man who had lost everything. I didn't need to look back. I knew Daniel Whitmore's world had completely crumbled. Daniel's fall and his final message. A month after Daniel signed the transfer agreement, Whitmore Enterprises was fully under my control. The company had stabilized after the damage Daniel had caused. The shareholders regained confidence, and the stock price started climbing again. I no longer thought about him. Daniel had disappeared from my life, or at least, that's what I believed. Until one afternoon, when I received a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but some instinct told me to answer. Melissa. The hoarse voice on the other end was one I knew all too well. Daniel. I leaned back in my chair, gripping the pen in my hand. Why are you calling me? There was a long pause. When he spoke again, there was no arrogance, no anger, only exhaustion. I've lost everything, Daniel sighed. Money, reputation, status. Dad was right, I had nothing but the Whitmore name. I remained silent. For the first time I heard real regret in his voice. But I didn't let myself soften. No, Daniel, you sold everything. You didn't lose anything. You traded it away for your own greed. A weak chuckle came from the other end. I always thought that as long as I had the company, the power, everything else would fall into place. He paused, his voice quieter. But Dad never cared about titles. He cared about who could keep the company alive. And that was you, not me. I closed my eyes, feeling a fleeting sense of sadness. Yes, my father had always known that. But he still held on to hope that Daniel could change. He had given him a chance, and Daniel had thrown it away. I don't expect you to forgive me, Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted to say, I understand now, even if it's too late. I took a deep breath. A part of me wanted to say something, but in the end I only replied in a calm voice. Good. Then don't come back. Daniel was silent for a few seconds. Then, I heard one final sigh. Goodbye, Melissa. The call ended. I stared at the screen, feeling neither joy nor sadness. Daniel had chosen his path, and now he was living with the consequences. I stood up, looking out the window. The city stretched before me, and atop the skyscrapers the Whitmore Enterprises logo still shone brightly. This company was no longer just an inherited asset. It was a legacy, and it belonged to the one who was truly worthy of protecting it. I had won everything, but more importantly, I had proven that power isn't given, it's earned. The aftermath. Melissa restores the company and protects her father's legacy. A week after my last call with Daniel, I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office at Whitmore Enterprises, overlooking the ever-moving city below. My entire life had been tied to this company, building my career under my father's guidance. Now, it was mine completely. But winning didn't mean the fight was over. Now was the time to ensure the company's future. I spent my first month as the official CEO restructuring everything. The mess Daniel left behind had to be cleaned up. His reckless financial decisions, the pointless projects he created for personal gain, the shady investments, everything had to go. We need to get this company back on track, I stated in my first executive meeting. I looked around the table, meeting the eyes of the senior team who had worked alongside my father for decades. Some still hesitated to accept me as their leader, but that didn't matter. I didn't need immediate approval. I would earn it through results. Daniel left behind a financial hole and massive budget deficits, the CFO reported. His poor investment choices cost the company millions. I nodded. We'll start by cutting all non-profitable projects. Our focus needs to return to the core values my father built this company on: quality, reputation, and sustainability. I saw heads nodding in agreement. I continued. I also want to send a clear message to our investors and clients. Whitmore Enterprises is no longer a family-run business based on entitlement. It is a powerful strategic corporation with a clear direction. After the meeting, I spent time visiting different departments in the company. I walked through offices, spoke with employees, and listened to their frustrations about working under Daniel. They didn't need a boss who gave orders from an ivory tower. They needed a leader who understood them. And that's exactly who I would be. 3 months after I took over, Whitmore Enterprises' stock prices fully recovered. Investors who had once hesitated returned. The company wasn't just stable. It was stronger than ever. I sat in my father's former office, reading the latest financial report on my desk. The headline on the business section of the newspaper caught my eye: Whitmore Enterprises rebounds under Melissa Whitmore's leadership. I set the newspaper down, inhaling deeply. This wasn't luck. This was the result of skill, strategy, and determination. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. My assistant entered, holding a serious expression. Daniel sent a letter. Slowly, I took the envelope from her hand, my fingers brushing over his familiar handwriting. I hadn't thought about Daniel since our last conversation. He had chosen his own path, and I had no intention of interfering. I opened the letter. The words inside were short but said everything that needed to be said. Melissa, you won. Not because you inherited the company, but because you earned it. Congratulations. Daniel? I closed my eyes for a brief moment, then folded the letter and placed it in my drawer. I didn't need validation from Daniel, I only needed validation from myself. I turned back to the window, the sunset casting a golden glow over the city skyline. The company my father built with his life's work was now fully in my hands, and I would take it to new heights. A lesson in competence, responsibility, and legacy. Life doesn't hand you power just because you want it, or because you have the right last name. Power, success, and respect must be earned, not given. Melissa and Daniel's battle for Whitmore Enterprises wasn't just about inheritance. It was a testament to an important truth. Competence will always triumph over entitlement. For those who have spent a lifetime building something, this lesson is even more crucial. When we look back, what truly matters isn't how much wealth we leave behind, it's the kind of legacy we build. A true legacy isn't measured in dollar signs, but in the values, ethics, and wisdom we pass on. Like Melissa's father, we must ensure that what we leave behind is not just a gift, but a responsibility, one that is entrusted to those who are truly capable of carrying it forward. Because in the end, what we leave behind is not just money. It is the mark we leave on the world.